This episode is brought to you by CuriosityStream, a subscription streaming service that offers over 2,000 documentaries and non-fiction titles. Unlimited access, starting at just $2.99 a month and 30 days for free if you sign up at curiositystream.com/geographics. Use the code geographics. More on them in a bit. Way out in the wilds of Central Asia on the Kazakh-Uzbek border lies the toxic remains of a dying sea. For thousands of years, the sea was a life-giver, bringing food, trade, and civilization. Covering an area the size of Ireland, it was the fourth largest freshwater lake in the world. But then, in the middle of the 20th century, something happened. An irrigation project went wrong, depriving the sea of vital water. In its place came toxic chemicals, poisons, and shores of unbreathable dust. Today, the sea is so deadly it's been called the Silent Chernobyl, but you likely know it by another name, the Aral Sea, the Soviet Union's greatest natural disaster. Beginning in 1948, Moscow diverted water away from the rivers feeding the sea towards agriculture. The plan was to make Central Asia into a fertile land of plenty. Instead, it triggered an environmental catastrophe so staggering we still don't know its true toll. From an ancient oasis to a modern desert ravaged by cancer-causing storms, this is the story of the Aral Sea and the bygone empire that killed it. 2,500 years ago, Alexander the Great stood on the shores of the surging river, surveying the waters. Behind him lay the vast swath of land he and his armies had overrun. Ahead lay an unknown frontier, a wilderness of tribes with bandits and harsh desert stretching out as far as the eye could see. As Alexander stood at the farthest northern extent of his ancient empire, little did he know that this wasn't the end of the world, that the river before him led not to empty wastelands, but to an expanse of water so vast it dominated the horizon. Today we know that expanse as the Aral Sea. First appearing some 11,000 years ago, the existence of the Aral Sea was a pleasing historical mistake. At the very end of the Neogene Period, a period of time so far back we'll just call it long ago BC, a depression formed in Central Asia on the border area of modern-day Uzbekistan and Kazakhstan. And there it remained for millions of years, doing nothing but being all low and depressing, until the Amu Darya decided to change course. Since time immemorial, the Amu Darya had flowed into the vast Caspian Sea to the west, but now it began to flow instead into the Aral Depression. As it flowed, the depression began to fill up. It began to look less like a depressing dip in the landscape and more like a lake. From this chance hydrological event, the Aral Sea was born. By the time Alexander the Great made it to the shores of the second river feeding it, the sea was one of the vastest lakes on Earth. You know Lake Biakal in Russia, a lake so famously large that it makes Loch Ness look like an embarrassing puddle? Well, the Aral Sea was over twice the size of it, and only ever so slightly smaller than Africa's Lake Victoria. As a result, it drew thousands upon thousands of peoples to its shorelines, from Tajiks to Uzbeks to Kazakhs. They were lured in by the promise of freshwater fish to hunt and islands to colonize. And yes, freshwater. Despite its name, the Aral Sea is not a sea in the undrinkable saltwater sense, but rather a regular lake with a salinity of around 10 grams of salt per litre, compared to 35 grams per litre for your average ocean. Not exactly something you'd want coming out of your tap, but fresh enough for fish like carp to survive. As for the islands, the Aral Sea is home to 1,000 islands, each over 1 hectare in size. The name even comes from the Kyrgyz word Aral Dengiz, meaning Sea of Islands. For ancient peoples, this fish-filled, island-filled sea basically hit the civilization G-spot. As cultures flourished along its shores, it became a famous stopping point along the Silk Road. But even in the dim and distant past, it was clear just how delicate the Aral Sea was. At some point in the Middle Ages, something happened to one of the two rivers feeding the sea. We're not exactly sure what that something was, if it was human-driven or related to some external factor. Either way, the result was an apocalyptic disaster. Shorn of its inflows, the Aral Sea began to dry up. As it dried, it shrank, until entire shoreside townships were abandoned dozens of kilometers from its waters. With the dying came economic catastrophe. By 1417, court historian Hafizi-Abru was able to write that the sea no longer existed. Thankfully, this spell of dryness didn't last. At some point in the 16th century, the Aral Sea began to return. By 1570, documents suggest that it had regained its full size. It was a historical near miss, a moment when the lake was very nearly wiped out. But it was also a warning to the future, a warning that the delicate ecology of the world's fourth largest lake could easily be destroyed. Unfortunately, though, the future wasn't in the mood for listening. If there's a single person you can blame for the destruction of the Aral Sea, it's Aleksandr Voeikov. But Voeikov wasn't a soldier or a politician. He was a climatologist, one who developed a bizarre dislike for the Aral Sea. Because the Aral Sea had no outflow and is instead maintained by evaporation, Voeikov seems to have taken offense to its very existence, calling it a useless evaporator and a mistake of nature. But what could Voeikov do about it? When he died in 1916, the lake remained an inarguable fact of nature. But Voeikov's writings, they survived. What's more, they influenced a whole generation. A generation who would soon be running the former Russian Empire. So let's cut ahead to 1948. In the years after Voeikov died, Imperial Russia fell, and the areas around the Aral Sea, they tasted independence, and then they were absorbed into the new USSR as the Kazakh and Uzbek Soviet Socialist Republics. Alongside this geopolitical shakeup, Lenin had died, Stalin had come to power, and decades of state-engineered famines, purges, and other assorted horrors had wreaked havoc across the empire. And now Stalin wanted to go even further than bending mere humans to his will. He wanted to mold the landscape itself. The Great Plan for the Transformation of Nature was the first major Soviet attempt to remake the non-productive areas of the empire. Non-productive in this case meaning virgin forests, centers of rural life, or inland seas supporting fishing villages, stuff you and I might class as, well, actually really kind of productive. But Uncle Joe preferred a definition of productive that involved not ordinary people living ordinary lives, but vast plantations making Moscow rich. And so it was that a network of irrigation channels began to spring up from the rivers feeding the Aral Sea, diverting water for growing cotton. Initially, these new Central Asian farms of white gold didn't affect the rivers much. There was just so much water, how could humans possibly exhaust it all? And even if they did, who cared? The people running the Soviet Ministry of Water could all recall Voeikov's words. If the Aral Sea was a useless evaporator, weren't they justified in putting its waters to better use? The toxic attitude prevailed even as Khrushchev took over after Stalin's death and launched his own Virgin Lands campaign. It prevailed even as irrigation channels crisscrossed Central Asia, diverting so much water that it was a miracle the sea survived. Yet survive it did. As 1960 dawns, the Aral Sea was in rude health. Stretching 435 kilometers north to south and 290 kilometers east to west, it was the center of vital local economies. Fishing villages dominated its shores. There were wetlands, river deltas, hidden bays, thriving and irreplaceable ecosystems. Local towns thrived too, like Aralsk or Tastabek, famous for its caviar. Were you to stand on the shorelines back then, you would have watched the fishermen in their boats, watched the children swimming, and thought to yourself that this was a vista that would last forever. Sadly, that wasn't the case. By 1960, the Water Ministry knew the Aral Sea was like a camel with a back so bent its spine was one single straw away from snapping. They could stop digging irrigation ditches right now and preserve this perfect balance, maintaining a living lake while also growing a decent amount of cotton. But a decent amount simply wasn't enough. The leadership wanted more white gold. Eyes wide open, still loyally quoting Voeikov, the Ministry of Water demanded yet more channels be dug and yet more flow diverted. Although they knew what they were doing, they assumed it would take decades for the effects to be felt, generations even. But they were wrong. And just before we get into just how wrong they were, I'd love to take a minute to tell you about today's sponsor, CuriosityStream. CuriosityStream is a subscription streaming service. They've got over 2,000 documentaries, non-fiction titles from some of the world's best filmmakers, including exclusive originals. If you're enjoying this video, why not, once you're done here, pop on over to CuriosityStream and try it out for free. If you're enjoying this video, you might enjoy the USSR. I mean, not the actual USSR, but they've got loads of videos about the USSR. I think they would be a great watch, a great expansion from what you've seen here today. CuriosityStream's available on many platforms, web app, Roku, Android. The list really does go on. It's also available worldwide, so wherever you are, you can access it. Get unlimited access starting at just $2.99 a month, and for you guys, the first 30 days are completely free if you sign up at curiositystream.com/geographics. Use the promo code geographics during the sign-up process. That's a great way to support the show. It keeps us making more videos, and I think CuriosityStream is really a great fit for this channel. And let's get back to today's video. In the summer of 1967, word began to go around the small Kazakh town of Tastabek that something was wrong. As a center of caviar exports, the locals were attuned to the ecosystem they worked in. The Aral Sea had been sustaining life here for centuries. But now something was happening. Almost before their eyes, the residents could see the waters drawing back, away from the shoreline, leaving the town behind. Those locals had no way of knowing it, but their town was like a canary lowered into a coal mine to check for leaking gas. And the agonizing death of their economy would be early warning of the oncoming explosion. Over the next few years, the effects of water diversion began to become clearer and clearer. By 1973, some of the wetlands and deltas had vanished, replaced by sandy desert. By 1980, the rivers feeding the sea were starting to run dry in the summer months when temperatures soared to 40 degrees Celsius. But it was over the next decade that the effects would really take hold. As the 1980s wore on, the shores of the Aral Sea retreated. They moved slowly at first, then quicker and quicker, until old fishing villages were stranded 2 hours' journey from the nearest fish. As the waters receded, the 1,000 islands the sea was famous for stopped being islands, first becoming peninsulas, and then just outcrops of rock in the midst of desert. One of the former islands was Aralsk 7, a secret bioweapons facility where Soviet scientists engineered weaponized plague. As you'll know if you've watched our video on it, Aralsk 7 had been selected on the assumption that the Aral Sea's waters would stop its microscopic nightmares from escaping. And now the sea was gone, leaving nothing between plague-carrying rats and hundreds of Kazakh villages. By 1987, the drying was so bad that there was no longer a single Aral Sea. Instead, the waters split in two, creating a smaller North Aral Sea inside Kazakhstan and a larger South Aral Sea, mostly in Uzbekistan. As these two seas shrank, the salinity of the water increased, jumping from 10 grams per liter to 110. In this toxic environment, fish began to die off, leaving entire villages starving. Come 1992, the combined area of the North and South Aral Seas was only 33,800 kilometers squared, barely half the area they'd once covered. The good news was that come 1992, the Ministry of Water was no longer a thing, and, well, neither was the Soviet Union. The USSR had collapsed in 1991, ending the drive for cotton production in Central Asia. Unfortunately, the successor governments had all realized that they were staring down the barrel of economic ruin without the cotton, and so they kept on growing it. And so the sea slowly died. By 2002, the South Aral Sea had subdivided again, splitting into the East and West Sea. As the 21st century dawned, towns sustained by the sea for centuries were now abandoned some 90 kilometers from the water. Between them and the receding shore lay nothing but empty desert spotted with the decaying hulks of abandoned ships. Faced with ruin, the people living around the sea abandoned it. Those who could fled. Those who couldn't sank into poverty, illness, and death. Come 2010, the East Aral Sea was barely a fifth the size it had been in 2002. In 2014, it dried up entirely. In 5 decades, Soviet mismanagement had done what Voeikov could never have dreamed of. It had killed the useless evaporator, desiccating the sea in a way unseen even during the Middle Ages. But it wasn't just the lack of water that caused disaster. There's a reason some refer to the Aral Sea as the silent Chernobyl. Like Chernobyl, it was a disaster made of Soviet incompetence. Like Chernobyl, it left behind a ghost town, or towns in this case. And like Chernobyl, it was a disaster that could kill you. In 2015, National Geographic published a series of interviews with locals living around the ruins of the former Aral Sea. One of them, Yusuf Kamalov from the lakeside region of Karakal, Pakistan, summed up the devastation as follows. "This is what the end of the world looks like," he said. "If we ever have Armageddon, the people of Karakal, Pakistan are the only ones who will survive because we are already living it." The Armageddon he was referring to was more than just visual. Although photos of the dried seabed littered with dead ships may look strangely beautiful, the reality of living there is anything but. As the sea dried, it left behind grounds that were saturated in salt. While the Soviet water scientists had predicted it would bake into a hard crust, it instead remains loose at the whims of the lightest breeze. The result is salt storms that can blow up out of nowhere, stinging your eyes and making you feel deathly ill. But the painful concentrations of salt are just the tip of the iceberg. The dust storms also blow deadly quantities of DDT, fosolone, and other pesticides. All are known to cause cancer after prolonged exposure, plus all manner of other nasty illnesses. In the years of the dead Aral Sea, cancer rates around Karakal, Pakistan have shot up to 25 times the world average. Those who escape cancer are felled by respiratory diseases, immune system disorders, and antibiotic-resistant tuberculosis. In short, the air around the Aral Sea is toxic to breathe, and even those who escape these deadly dust storms suffer. So many chemicals have been dumped into the area, sunk to the bottom of the waters long ago, that every part of the food chain has become contaminated. If you want a single depressing statistic to sum up the danger of living in this remote corner of the world, you should know that infant mortality rates here are some of the highest on Earth, growing steadily since the 1970s, even as they drop in the rest of Kazakhstan and Uzbekistan. All in all, it's a disaster area, a place inimical to human life, and it gets worse. When the sea vanished, the effect on the local climate was beyond comprehension. From somewhere that experienced relatively mild weather, the Aral Depression had become somewhere that the weather gods seem to have taken a personal dislike to. Nowadays, temperatures swinging wildly between -40°C and +40°C are not uncommon, blasting and burning this once fertile land into a lifeless desert. In this hostile world, one of the few things that seem capable of surviving is the bubonic plague, which occasionally causes minor outbreaks. While we're not definitely tying the ongoing existence of the Black Death in the Aral Sea region to the abandoned Soviet bioweapons lab working on the plague right nearby, we are saying it's certainly a bit of a coincidence. And that really is the Aral Sea today. A forgotten, toxic world festering in Central Asia, where all that remains of a once great lake are devastated towns and sick and penniless people. According to scientists, the chances of the Uzbek East Sea ever replenishing in our lifetimes are vanishingly remote. The Aral Sea, it seems, is dead. At least in Uzbekistan it is. Earlier we mentioned that when the Aral Sea first divided, the North Sea wound up in Kazakhstan and the south in Uzbekistan. While the unfolding disaster has continued unabated in Uzbekistan, the same cannot be said for its northern neighbor. Unlikely as it seems, our video today isn't just a story of environmental degradation and despair, although there has been plenty of that. It's also a story of hope. Time for us to venture upwards, at last, to the North Aral Sea, where the decades of destruction haven't just been stopped, they've been actively reversed. If you'd surveyed the North Aral Sea in 1994, chances are you'd have predicted a complete collapse in the next few years. At that point, the North Aral Sea was drying even faster than the South Aral Sea, and a meeting that year between Kazakhstan, Turkmenistan, Uzbekistan, Tajikistan, and Kyrgyzstan on preserving the two rivers feeding it had amounted to nothing. But while things would get worse over the next decade, they would soon start to get better. In the early 2000s, Kazakhstan presented the World Bank with a plan for combating the North Aral Sea's decline. With the sea's catastrophic death, headline news at the time, the World Bank handed over $87 million, likely expecting that it would help slow the decline and nothing more. But to everyone's surprise, the Kazakhs instead managed to save their sea. The first step was to completely sever the North Aral Sea from the south. Until the mid-2000s, a narrow channel ran between the two, filtering water down from Kazakhstan to Uzbekistan. The Kazakh government decided that rather than let both seas die, they'd sacrifice one to save the other. A vast dike known as the Kokaral Dam was built across the channel, trapping the North Sea's waters in Kazakhstan. At the same time, a massive cleanup operation was launched along the Sir River, the same river Alexander the Great had stood beside many centuries before. When the work was completed in 2005, scientists thought it might take 10 years to replenish the Aral Sea. To everyone's shock, the water level rose 3.3 meters in 7 months. As the North Aral Sea slowly refilled, its salinity levels began to drop. Shores that had been salt-swept deserts sank once more beneath the waves. The waters got closer and closer again to those old fishing villages. As the 2010s got underway, the Kazakh government decided to try reintroducing fish that had died when the salinity levels went through the roof. Not only did the fish survive, they thrived. Around the same time that the East Aral Sea was vanishing from existence, the North Aral Sea reopened to fishermen. Villagers who'd last caught fish in the 1980s returned to the water for the first time in decades. Sons of those fishermen who'd only ever known a life of grinding poverty had their first experiences in a boat. From a dead industry, fishing in the North Aral Sea once again became a viable way to make a living. You can see the effects most clearly in the town of Aralsk. A one-time port city, Aralsk slumped into decline in the 1980s as the disaster took hold. In the depths of the crisis, the fishing town found itself stuck 150 kilometers from sea so salty that no fish could live in it. By 2018, the closest date we could get for accurate figures, the waters had returned to just 17 kilometers from the edge of the town. With the water came bream, pike perch, and flounder. From abandoning all hope, the older generation now truly believes they will live to see the day when the waters return to Aralsk's docks. But for that to happen, a few more miracles do have to take place. While the North Aral Sea is today thriving, it has also grown back as far as it currently can. The Kokaral Dam is too small to hold back any more water, with the result that billions of cubic meters are now lost every year. It's estimated that merely adding another 4 meters height to the dike would retain enough water to allow the North Aral Sea to regrow by another 400 square kilometers. Enough to, perhaps, at last, turn Aralsk back into a thriving port. At the time of writing, there was no deadline for this expansion. The Kazakh government was giving nothing more than vague words of commitment to the project. But hopefully it will happen soon. Hopefully the elderly fishermen in Aralsk will be able to see their sea once more, lapping at the docks, as alive as they remember it once being. If that happens, well, it might just qualify as a miracle. The story of the Aral Sea, then, is actually two separate stories. One about the toxic Soviet Sea turning into desert, and one about the reborn sea to its north. But more than that, it's a tale about choices. About how we can look at habitat destruction and environmental degradation and choose to either turn a blind eye and accept the worst, or to dig our heels in, grit our teeth, and actually do something about it, no matter the cost. The recovery of the North Aral Sea hasn't been easy, and it's still a long way from where it once was. But hope has returned, bringing with it a glimpse of a better future. And if we can save a sea as contaminated and as degraded as the Aral Sea, then maybe, just maybe, there's hope for the rest of our world too. So I really hope you found that video interesting. If you did, please do hit that like button below, subscribe to this channel for more videos every week. Also, support this show by supporting our fantastic sponsor CuriosityStream, who are linked to below. Thank you for watching.